This is a little bit of a review about yesterday, but it's also applying the Sgraffito methods and the underglaze onto clay. So make sure your phones are put away and take a look up here. This is really important because then you can actually see the process rather than just looking at pictures. Yesterday I talked about taking a piece of tracing paper and tracing an image and applying it to clay. And so you can see that I've done that here in this little coaster. I cut up a bunch of tracing paper and I put it in the paper drawer in the front of the room. There's also a big roll of tracing paper right next to it under the flag. I'm going to keep the tracing paper separate from the ceramics tool so it's clean paper. So here's my drawing. And you know what? I did it in marker so I could see it. And then I laid it on top and I traced it. And a little tip for you is that I actually got a ballpoint pen and I traced the ballpoint pen. It worked better than the pencil because it's consistent. It doesn't break off in the clay. There are pens in the back of the room in those little white cubbies. So if you want to use a ballpoint pen, it actually turned out better than the pencil, and you can kind of see that there. And then anything that I missed, I can actually take the ballpoint pen and I can use that. I draw my clay with the ballpoint pen all the time. So there should be plenty in the back there. Just put them back when you're done. Just clean off the tip, you know, with your hand or a sponge. So that's my design in clay, and it's actually almost leather hard, so it's ready for me to put underglaze on it. This is the one I did yesterday that I drew in the clay, but it's not dry enough. It's not leather hard yet, so I'm not going to put underglaze on it yet. And I still want to finish my drawing, but I used the nib tool to make it so it's nice and smooth. And I haven't really done that on this one yet, but that's okay, just for my demonstration. But if I were to have time, I would go in and I would use a nib tool to clean it up. But for this one, I still want to add to it. So because I'm not finished, I'm going to cover it up for now so I don't get glaze on it as well. Okay. All right. So I have my design. If you want to have it next to you while you're working, it doesn't really matter. It's totally up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and put on my coats of underglaze, and then I'm going to do a little Sgraffito. But I'm going to be switching back and forth with a couple of different things as well, so pay attention. All right, so I've got my brush. It's clean enough. And then you're going to get your underglaze. And so I'm just going to use black because you can see it really well. The underglazes are in the glaze area is over in the back of the room. There's a glaze sink, which you can use anytime. We just call it the glaze sink. And then next to it are all the glazes. The underglazes are under the cabinet, okay, and they're labeled. It says underglazes. If you're not sure, just look at it. And they're velvet underglazes, and there's other kinds there too. Just give it a good spin like this. Don't shake them up because they stick to the lid and they make a big mess. So just give it a stir, and then take the lid off, and you're going to pour it in a small container, okay? When you're finished, you need to scoop it back into the container so it doesn't go to waste, because these are expensive. Okay, so then when you're ready, you're just going to apply your glaze. So one thing I don't have underneath here is a piece of paper. So I'm just going to stick a couple of pieces of paper underneath while I'm glazing. It just keeps the surface clean. All right, so I'm going to get my glaze, and I'm going to put a coat over it. And mine is just leather hard, so you can kind of see it's a little streaky, and that's okay. You just don't want to put it on when it's wet. If you put it on when the clay is wet, it's going to be, it's going to streak your design, so you don't want to do that. Okay, so here's one coat. Try to make it as even as possible. Oops, let me move that up so you can see better. There we go, come on. So there's my one coat. It's a little uneven here, so I'm going to smooth it over. There's places I missed in here, but that's okay. No big deal. I can go back over it. Then it needs to dry. Oh, fine. If you want to do the edges at this point, you can. If you're going to Sgraffito or add design, it's your choice. But if not, you can do those later. It doesn't matter. So after you do the one coat, it needs to dry. So you can fan it gently. Just don't blow on it, 'cause you can blow stuff everywhere. Then when that's totally dry, you're going to do a second coat. And usually I put my second coat on the opposite direction. Okay? And it is almost dry. I'm going to go ahead and put my second coat on. And then smooth it over. See if that's good enough. Okay, so that's two coats. Let me see if I can. Hopefully that's okay. There we go. So then when that's totally dry, then you can start doing Sgraffito. But it has to be completely dry. You're going to smear it everywhere. But I know I can still see my design underneath. Also, a little hint about your brushes. Please, we have these little cups. Please listen. If you're having a conversation, please hold it, your conversation. We have these mugs, and they're over on the glazing area. You can use these for water. I wouldn't use them for glazes, because I have little cups for glazes. Use these for water, because it's easy to carry it around. And when you clean your brush, just kind of swirl it around inside at your table, and then use the side, and then look at it to see if there's still glaze on it. Don't stand at the sink and waste a bunch of water cleaning your brush. Just use this to clean your brush off. And then if you can't get any glaze off of this area, then you can take it over to the sink and just clean it a little bit. Don't let the glazes dry on the brush, okay? And then you can use a sponge or paper towel or whatever to dry it off. Okay, so that brush is pretty clean. Well, sort of clean. I think I might clean it again. Don't leave your brushes sitting in glaze, and don't leave your brushes sitting in water because it ruins the brushes, makes them all monkeyed up. So I don't like that. It's not good. Okay, so this is still wet, so I need to wait to do Sgraffito on this one. But I can show you a little bit of Sgraffito on another bowl. This is a student bowl left behind last semester, so I grabbed it yesterday, cleaned it up a little bit. And what I did was I had a design that I drew in it, and then I put wax on it. So I'm going to show you wax design while we're waiting for Sgraffito, this Sgraffito coaster thing to dry. So I'm going to move this over a little bit so I don't get dust on it, and that's drying. So now I'm going to switch to wax. So if you don't know anything about wax resist, you need to pay attention, okay? So wax resist, like I talked about yesterday, is in these little containers here, and then there's another large container. Just like the glaze, you're going to put it in this container. And then get a brush, make sure it's fairly clean. There it is. And then you can paint your wax on. So you can do wax on something that's leather hard or something that's bone dry. So this one's bone dry, okay? So also, on bone dry clay, you can draw designs. So use a pencil and you can draw designs on it if you'd like. That makes it easier to put the wax on. And they don't have to be perfect unless you want them to be perfect. So here we go. I just drew a couple of circles on. Now I'm going to get some wax. And then I'm going to put wax in the circle areas here. It doesn't have to be really thick. So for this project, I'm going to let you choose these methods that you want to use on your work. So it's really important that you know about them, because other projects I'm going to say, oh, we're going to use this method for it. So there's a project that we're going to do this semester where you have to do paper pattern. It's a required design element. It'll be fun. You'll like it. So, but this one you can choose wax, you can choose Sgraffito. You can also make combinations of any of them together. Okay, so there's the wax. Make sure you clean your brush off really well right after you use the wax. If you ever have a brush that has wax on it, it dries. It's really hard to get out of it, so I have to clean those with like hot water. So I have a kettle, and I just do those after school or something. And then make sure that it's clean. Just kind of use your fingers on it. If it's sticky, it's still not clean. But the sinks get hot enough water where you can clean it with really hot water. Okay, so that's the wax. Now that is drying. So I'm going to set that aside, because this has to dry before I paint on it. But I'm going to turn it over, and you can see that the circles that these are wax that I painted on with the wax. Then I let them dry. And then I coated 3 coats of underglaze on, this black underglaze. And then I let that dry. I think I did 2 actually. 2 coats of black underglaze. Then I let that dry. And the one thing that you have to know about the black, or about the wax, is that you get these little tiny dots, and I'll show you up here close. Hopefully it'll focus. It might not. I'm going to do this. Come on. There we go. You see the little dots on top of the wax? So you have a choice. You can either leave the dots on, or you can get a sponge and you can clean them off. Just bring my basket. Thank you. So if you want to clean off the little dots, you just take a sponge and you just do this. Or you get a brush that's a little bit damp and you move around the water and it wets it down, and then you get the sponge and you dab it on there to get it off. You can also use a Q-tip. I have Q-tips, and they're in the very back. In one of the drawers, it says textures, because Q-tips are great for textures. You can get it wet, and then you can take it off. The Q-tip actually works really well. It works nicely. So you can use that if you want. Or you can leave them on there because it does make a nice effect. It's your choice. Okay. And then I used a Sgraffito tool, and I Sgraffitoed in the design. However, this was bone dry, or almost bone dry, so it was really dusty, completely not healthy. So I had to like put paper under it, and I had a mask on when I was doing it because I don't want to get dust in my lungs. And then I took care of it very carefully with a dry brush into the garbage can. But ooh, this is still sticky wet. So I would ask that you not Sgraffito in something that's dry. But if your work does dry, and you're like, oh, I was going to plant a Sgraffito and it dried out, what am I going to do? Come and see me, and I'll show you a safe way to Sgraffito on something that's dry. But I prefer that you just do it when it's leather hard, okay? So I'm going to set that aside while it dries, and I'm going to go back to this coaster, okay? So this is the Sgraffito part, and I'm almost done. So here's where you have to verify to make sure you have enough glaze on. You have to really look at it carefully and look at it close up to see, is it coated enough? I would say it's probably coated enough for what I'm going to do, okay? But if I wanted some areas to be more solid, I would put another coat on it, okay? But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and do what I was going to do. So here's the design that I picked out, and I changed some things about it, but I want to use some of the techniques that are in the drawing here on my work. So I have to think a little opposite. So everything that I remove is going to be white. Everything I leave behind is going to be black. But I might do it opposite. I haven't decided yet. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to start carving. I'll start with the leaf. If I'm going to remove everything that's white, that's going to be a lot that I'm taking away. Maybe I want to do opposite, because I have some lines in here already. Or maybe I just want to do details. You decide what you want to do. So basically, if your work is leather hard, it's going to be removed very quickly. So if I do some lines like this Sgraffito works really well. I mean, I'm barely touching it. Let me hold it up. I know this thing's like a weird focusing camera. So I'm barely touching it. Let me just see if I can get this. Come on, please focus. Just this once. How about there? Just once. Come on. Face me. I'm gonna go buy my own camera. Alright, well, that's what it is. Okay, so if I were gonna Sgraffito all of this, it doesn't take that long. Maybe I want to go in the drawing that I already made, and I can go in the lines that I drew. So I could even do that if I wanted to. And then maybe I want to do some lines. Is it showing up? Sort of. There we go. So you can kind of see that all I'm doing is just gently carving away with the Sgraffito tool. You can also use these tools, like the pictures I had yesterday, and you can use these to remove areas. So I'm just going to work on this a little bit. And then I'm waiting for that wax to dry. It's almost done. I think it's about ready. So basically, this is the Sgraffito technique right here. You can clear away as much as you want, but it's a really nice way of getting a nice design on your work. And actually, now that I'm really looking at it, I think I'm going to do more of like a painterly look, or like a drawing approach to it. So in drawing, we call this cross-hatching or hatching. So basically, if you scratch away or use Sgraffito methods, that's what you're doing on clay. And if you don't like it and you mess up, you can actually get a brush and you can paint it in again. See if you can see a little bit of that better. There we go. That's a little better. You can see my flower. It's starting to emerge. See? So then you just keep going until you have enough design where you're like, okay, I think I'm going to be finished. Then you touch up anything with underglaze that you need to. If you want to like do the sides of your work, I just have a coaster because it's flat and it's easy to see, but like let's say you have a bowl If your work is on the side of the bowl, you can tip the bowl sideways and hold it. So here's an example. This is a demo for paper pattern. You'll just be holding it like this, and you'll just be sgraffitoing it. If you're finding it's difficult to hold it steady, hold it against your body. Just like lean it against yourself. And there's aprons up there hanging up by where the towels are. Just hold it against yourself and do that. If your form is not holding its shape, then that means it's not dry enough. It needs to dry a little bit more. So putting it in the paper or the plastic bag and opening up the plastic bag or draping it just over a little bit is fine. And you can also just leave it sitting out at your table. Another option is you could set it on the radiator. There's a radiator that's open all the way across the room here. It's not going to blow any dust anywhere. It'll just radiate heat, but be careful because if it's too thick, it'll dry too fast and it'll crack. So you don't want that. So that's Sgraffito method with just one color glaze, underglaze. Does anybody have any questions about doing this method? Okay, so that's that demo. And I'm going to go back to, let me just set this. I'm going to go back to this bowl that I put wax on because I want to make sure that you understand this part. So here's the wax that I put on my work. Now I'm not going to paint the whole thing because I'm going to use the same thing for a demo all day long. But when you put wax resist on something, you'll see how this works. So I have my black glaze and I'm going to paint just a little bit on here and you'll see how it resists. You see how that works? The wax doesn't, the glaze doesn't really attach to it. You can also go in as you're painting and remove some of it from on top of the wax because it leaves like little bubbles. But the wax burns away in the kiln and what's left behind is just the design that you painted in wax. However, if there's a little bit of glaze on top of the wax, often you see that. Sometimes it's really nice. Sometimes people do not like it and they get upset about it. Oh, it's supposed to be perfect and it's not. No. So that's something that you can talk to me about. You can also use a sponge or your finger or a Q-tip to remove it. But usually it burns off and it doesn't stick. So that's what wax resist does. So you can see that right there. And then if I paint the whole thing, it's going to look similar to this. Now here's another thing. You can take the Sgraffito tool and you can scratch into the wax for another design if you like. Let's say I Sgraffito more. I mean, I'm not going to do it right now because it's really dry clay, but let's say that I want to add another color on here, okay? So if I want to get, say, a purple underglaze, and I mix it up, get it really nice, I can paint purple on here. The purple's going to go where I did Sgraffito, but it's also going to go on top of the black. So you have to keep that in mind. But what if I just want to paint purple on the wax and I want to layer it so I only have purple in the cracks? I could totally do that. You can layer underglaze on top of underglaze. And then I could even go on top of where I Sgraffitoed and I could block that off with wax. It can get really complicated. So what I can do is I can say, well, I want these circles to not have any glaze in the Sgraffito that I put over them. And maybe, just maybe I want a black outline instead. So yeah, you can go over many, many times with wax to save what you've painted underneath. And if your brain's exploding right now, that's okay. It's a lot to think about. Sometimes I hear an artist talking about their work and I say, wait a minute, you did what? And I think, wow, you could have done it this way instead. And they go, oh, yeah, I guess I could have. I just spent a couple of hours doing something completely different. But sometimes it's the process of it and you learn from it. So if there's something that you really want to do, you can always do a test of it as well. It just takes extra time. So what I'm doing is I'm putting wax around these little circles. And so what's going to happen is I'm saving the black. So the black's not going to have paint on it. The paint's underneath it. So you kind of have to think in layers. I hope that makes sense. And then I'm just going to get a different kind of design. And maybe I'll go in and I'll put little dots. Maybe I want little dots on it. Or maybe I want other circles. I don't know. You can change your design as you're going as well. So if there's something that you think, oh, this might look cool, I think I'm going to do it. And then if you fire it and you don't like it, well, there's always other glazes you can put over things if you don't like it, okay? But just remember that Sgraffito has to be done before you fire it for the first time. That's really important. So if you're going to Sgraffito on this project, that's your choice. You have to do it before it dries out and before it gets fired. So if you're going to do wax, you can do wax on something that's already been fired once. So keep that in mind. I know I'm throwing a lot of design ideas at you right now, but I think it's important for you to know that you've got lots of choices. So the wax can be put on something after it's been fired once. For example, I have this. It's been fired once. It's a picture frame, and it has holes that you can hang it up. And so if I want this area right here to have no color on it, I can go in and I can wax all of this, or I can put a design on it. Then I can go and I can glaze it with underglaze or overglaze. Overglazes are shiny when you fire them after the first time. Underglaze, you have to put on a clear coat, but all of our overglazes are shining. There's like maybe 2 matte finishes, but that's what it is. So if I wax this middle section and I let that dry, I could glaze the whole thing up, and then this is going to still be white when I fire it. So yes, you can wax things after it's been fired as well. You just can't dig into the clay after it's fired, okay? And then the other part I wanted to show you about texture, like let's say I carved these flowers. After it's fired, you can see that there's texture in it. So if I wanted this to be black in the cracks, I could just, this is after it's fired, of course, maybe I want to do this whole thing. I could put color in it, let it completely dry, then I could take a sponge and I could buff off the surface and just leave clay in the cracks, like this. And I'm not going to clean it up perfectly right now, but you get the idea. So the clay can stay only where you've carved something out. So that's important for you to know. So with Sgraffito, if you want the carved areas, or if you want different carved things to be a different color, you want to do that after you fire it. So here it is before I painted, and here it is after. I hope that makes sense. So that's just a little like, I see how that works kind of thing. Okay? Right. So I hope that makes sense with wax. I'm going to put a coat of purple or something on here. And then I'm going to leave this as is for now, so you can see any examples. If you want to come up here and look at any examples at my demo table, you are welcome anytime to look. Please don't pick anything up or mess with anything, because usually I leave it in a place so I can pick up the next class period and continue on. Let's see. I think that's it.